Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining today. It's great to see a few of your names popping up across a couple of the events. There's a very good commitment from all of you. It's been a really fun day so far, or I hope you found it a fun day so far. This is our final event of the day, last but not least, and definitely one that I've been very excited for all day. We're going to be hosting a little panel discussion on making the change. So the title is, what are we doing to address the challenges of social justice? And I will be joined by three panelists who we will come on to introduce in just a moment. But I just wanted to say this is very much a panel where we're encouraging audience participation. So please do, if anything comes up, drop questions in the chat. Feel free to share experiences. I'll be keeping an eye on that whilst chatting away to my wonderful panelists. But please do, if you have any questions, do just drop them in. And if we don't get around to them today, I'm sure we can get back to you after the event. It is being recorded, so we will be able to share this afterwards. It will be going up on our website on Monday, so you can share this to anyone who might miss this. So without further ado, we'll get started. I'm gonna ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and just give a little bit of information about why they're here and what they're up to. So I'm gonna start with Nadeem and hand over to you.
Yeah, hello everybody and welcome. So I'm Nadeem Mughal. I'm a medic by background. So I guess essentially what I will do is just give you a quick run through of a few of the decades and bring you up to date and perhaps explain why I'm here. Maybe I'll start with that. The reason I'm here is because I have an interest in how social justice matters and how it can be focused upon to try and make a difference in people's lives. And of course, a lot has been written by many cleverer people on this matter, but it's really about how do you take this thing that is called social justice and try and make a difference in the world you're in, I guess. So it's a bit of brief background. I was born in Uganda. I had a fantastic childhood until everything was uprooted quite dramatically and unexpectedly, and then we landed as refugees in England in '72, and it was really, of course, a very difficult time for the family in terms of coming to a country with nothing, virtually nothing, and then trying to start all over again in every sense. And as a child, I guess I was protected for some of the many stresses and strains that go with that, and of course learned a lot about that subsequently through the decades. But essentially, it was living and growing up in a country that was struggling even more then than it is now with the idea of immigrants and immigration and ethnic minorities. It was a really interesting experience in the sense that since then, and ever since, I have somewhat kept a view of the world a little bit looking outside, from outside looking in, and reflecting on why things happen the way they are and how that might have impacted on my own journey. So that's kind of a sort of constant, unrelenting reflection that I have built into my day-to-day life. I was fortunate to be fortunate, I guess, in the sense that my father sacrificed a huge amount to give us the best education possible. Not that I think it was the best education, but he didn't know any better. So because he didn't know any better, he felt that if he spent money, I'd get the best education. And on reflection, I think that was obviously a perspective as a consequence of not really having the support and understanding of what might have been a better option for his children. And I think that reflects on also how the world has changed in terms of being able to get information to make good decisions. So in the '70s, it wasn't so easy to make good decisions. I think now we're in a better position to make decisions just because information is so freely available, as well as making connections with people is so much more easier now than it was all those decades ago. So I was fortunate to then find myself studying medicine, although I'm not sure that's necessarily what I really wanted to do when I ended up doing it. I don't regret it at all. And I've had a fantastic career in medicine, but actually realized that actually medicine was a means to other things that I was really more interested in, and ended up doing lots of interesting things around leadership, transformation, quality improvement, and now very, very focused in the ideas of professionals and professionalism and how you move from managing professionals to governing professionals. So my medical career has given me opportunities that are outside what I think are the very narrow ideas of pathology and disease, etc. I did enjoy it and somewhat sometimes think about what I'm missing in terms of looking after children and adults and their families, really, when I was a consultant pediatric nephrologist in Newcastle. But I don't have any regrets for what I then ended up doing. I then had a really, I suppose, very difficult, pretty horrific year in 2017 when I was being treated for cancer. So that was fascinating again, because my world stopped, but of course the world carried on. So you have a moment to just think and reflect on what's past and what might happen. And that year, in one sense, cognitively wasn't wasted, but it was a moment where it could have gone either way, really, several times, okay, in fact. But in any event, that then forced me to rethink what I really wanted to do. And I've ended up thinking I was going to retire, and I've actually been never busier in my life. And that's really because I kind of been pushing myself to do things that are much more about supporting and enabling people and teams to be the best they can be. Because I think if I reflect on what I enjoyed doing over the decades, it was teaching, training, mentoring, coaching informally individuals and teams through the challenges that they face. And I do a lot more of that now. And in the frame of social justice, I for sure believe in the very strong concept of localism in one sense. I mean, so we can struggle with what governments and policy try and do and fail to do for populations and countries, remembering that the concept of a country is really quite a new concept in human experience. And perhaps the way to look at some of these challenges is much more locally. With local, you can define what you mean by local. It could be the street you're in, it could be the community you live in, it could be actually the faculty you're in, it could be the university you're embedded in. And that could be the sense of where your local opportunity to make a difference really sits. And there's nothing more powerful than opening the horizon of somebody and coaching them through what they might then be able to do with their lives, remembering that through that process, you haven't changed the people around the individual, the environment around the people, the buildings around the people. You've just changed the way they might want to think about life for themselves. So I coach 13-year-old teenagers in London in terms of understanding what careers might look like or what futures might look like, because they may not have that opportunity because of their family and community constraints, which I think is quite interesting. And I've learned a lot just from doing that. And I coach all the way to the other end, executives and organizations, because in the end we are humans and we are forever trying to figure out how best to take the next step or the next decision. So I guess, we're all the product of our experiences, and I'm the product of several decades of a somewhat convoluted journey. And I have enjoyed it. It's not always been easy. I've faced up to all the issues that one does when comes in as a refugee, with issues of racism, getting used to the ideas of new cultures, trying to fit in, watching other cultures struggle and other colleagues and people struggle, and figuring out how can you work that through, really. So it's been fascinating, really, for me. And I have enjoyed all of it in one sense, because I've learned from anything that hasn't worked. That's really me, I guess. I'm happy to take questions on any of that at some point. I don't know that it's that interesting, really, but there you go.
I think that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that journey with us. I definitely have already a whole list of things I want to chat to you about, but I'll come back to those. I'm next up going to ask Jessica to please introduce herself. Over to you, Jessica.
Yeah, hi everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm calling in from Bangladesh, so bear with me if I have technical issues. So my name is Jessica Stanford. I studied mechanical engineering at Newcastle. And in fact, I studied mechanical engineering, sort of European version. So I got to do the third year of my degree in Germany at Partner University on Erasmus. I think as I sort of explain maybe my background and my journey, and I think that was a great sort of piece from Nadeem about life is a journey, and it's definitely not planned. And my trajectory has not been planned, that's for sure. So yeah, I studied mechanical engineering, as I say, spent the third year in Germany, and essentially fell in love with being in different countries from that point forward. So worked as a graduate, went straight into mechanical engineering, worked for about 10 years for a global FTSE 100 engineering corporation, but traveling all around the world, working in different countries, and having an amazing sort of experience that way. But in terms of the topic of what we're talking about today, about 9-10 years into that career sort of trajectory, which was fairly standard, I would say at that point, I really sort of took some time to question what I wanted and what I wanted to be sort of contributing to the world, and took a bit of a left turn. So I left my corporate role, and I went and volunteered with an organization that sends volunteers overseas. So I went to work still within the area of mechanical engineering, but over in Nepal. So I was working with the government and helping them to do large scale renewable energy projects. And I just happened to be therefore in Nepal when a major earthquake struck in 2015. It was 7.8 on the Richter scale. It was huge, damaged almost 1 million houses. So 1 million households were suddenly, stranded overnight. Luckily, the death toll was relatively low because the earthquake happened at about midday on a Saturday. So most people were outside or awake at least and able to get out of the buildings. But if it had happened at night, for example, or when schools were in action, the death toll would have been considerably worse. So that kind of just in most memorable 45 seconds of my life, twisted everything again on another pivot. And I started to work in the post-earthquake reconstruction, helping displaced households, but also just people trying to figure out what to do and how to rebuild. Then spent about 6 or 7 years working in safe construction of houses and schools for earthquakes, hurricanes, major typhoons, and different sort of storm and earthquake combinations that happen in a lot of nations around the world. And that took me not only in Nepal, but then on to the Caribbean and the Philippines that get hit by these major events on a regular basis. And I think this is, sort of where to pull in the idea that there are no natural disasters. So there are definitely natural events that affect, certain areas of the world, but the disaster comes from how prepared and how the capacity that those countries have to cope and those communities have to cope. And that's where, for me, we start to get to this idea of social justice, or the area that I work in, because those disasters just disproportionately affect women, girls, poor communities, and communities who are already struggling to live perhaps in areas affected by climate change, and sort of poorer economies and all of these things. And then they get hit by an earthquake. But currently, so just continuing on the trajectory, so I've also sort of pivoted again in the not too recent past. I'm currently working in Bangladesh, supporting the world's largest refugee camp that there is here in Bangladesh, of Rohingya refugees from Myanmar. So there's about 850,000 people that I, in a tech capacity, supports to get their food every day, every month, and using innovative technology to help improve those systems and make sure that those refugees can get those, basic services and rights of, for example, access to food, but in the most dignified way, with the greatest choice and the greatest flexibility that we can give to them to make their lives as comfortable as possible. And there again, I would say my theme with social justice is, again, it's often the people who are struggling anyway to be given power in their own country, or access to things that we take completely for granted, that are then massively displaced because of conflict, and put in an even harder position, as many of the refugees are. So I think, so that's let's say a brief history of me, using now the less of the engineering that I studied at university, but still the problem solving and sort of analytics, and the ability to translate technical things to non-technical people, which is really something that I learnt through both the degree and then working in the industry. and has proven invaluable to make sure that we're really making the most of whatever the technology is to really help people. And at the end of the day, that's, everything needs to be about the people in front of us and what they need. So I think I will also leave it there and maybe see when the questions come up what else I can say. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That is a fascinating journey. I definitely will be circling back to you about the role of tech. I think we've definitely seen in the last few years how that's being kind of brought in. I am going to go on. So we were going to have Charlie Webster joining us. For those of you who are attending today, unfortunately, Charlie had to go in for a work situation today, so she's unable to join us. But there's a short little bio there of who she is and what she does. Feel free to have a little browse. You can also see more about her on the website. And so I'm going to move on now to Chris. So our final panelist, Chris, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce yourself. And thank you for joining us.
Hello there. I'm calling from Lebanon, so the internet is going to be difficult, so I apologize in advance. I am the co-founder of Future Academy. We educate forgotten children in English schools and football academies across Beirut in all the different refugee camps. I went to Newcastle and I studied English language, but I wish I'd studied English literature if I could have my time again. So I became a travel writer, which was really cool, but turns out it doesn't pay that well. So then I started working as a speechwriter, writing speeches for people who are more important than me, let's say. And through a series of events, I became the personal tutor to the royal family in Dubai, which was interesting. But after a while, my pockets were full, but my soul was empty. So quite similarly, actually, to the journey that Jeff, I chose to leave the money world, and I volunteered at MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières. There I met a man called Ahmad Al-Jamal, who was the first ever Palestinian refugee to become a professional footballer in Lebanon. And I still think I could be, actually, but that ship is sailing. So we decided to start a charity in the camp where he grew up. It's called Burj Barajneh. It's in South Beirut. So we have an English school and a football academy there. I run the English school, Ahmad runs the football academy. But it's not your average school. We sort of combine the classroom with the pitch so that lessons feel like sport and learning feels like winning. Because our kids don't have to come. No one's forcing them to come. They're mainly Palestinian, Syrian refugee children aged between about 6 and 16. And they live in a limbo. They were born in Lebanon, but they're stateless. They've got no passport, no basic human rights, no access to government schools, hospitals, no safety net. So the only reason that they would choose to come to school is if they're excited and interested. So we gamify everything. We make learning fun, or we try to anyway. I basically designed the syllabus as I would have wanted it when I was a child at school. So it's basically problem solving. You know, every day there's 10 problems. We solve 8 of them and then move on to the next day, and 10 more appear. To give you an example on the topic of what we're talking about in social equality is one of our star students, you can see him on the left there actually, in the stripy t-shirt, Akram. He was our star student. He hadn't been to school since he was 7 years old. And when we started, he came every lesson. He was early. Can you hear me still? Yeah. He had the same seat every lesson. He was always there first. He would leave last, and he loved word searches. He couldn't get enough of word searches. And about a month ago, he stopped coming just out of nowhere, and we didn't know why. And it turned out that he had to take a job. So he now works 7 days a week in a clothes shop, age 13. So I now, before every lesson, when I go into the camp, I go and deliver him a load of word searches, colouring pencils, colouring books, and his boss in the shop doesn't let him do his schoolwork because he thinks it distracts him from his work. So I've built him a little tower of shoe boxes in the corner so that he can hide behind them and do his work. So this is, in terms of trying to create social equality at our level, we can only really make sort of a generational change. If Akram can learn English, he can find a better job with a salary that means his kids can go to school and have a normal childhood and not have to work. We're obviously working at a grassroots level, and I think that charities like ours have to recognise that disadvantaged children require a different syllabus to succeed. They need to learn language skills to have a chance in life, not just to pass exams. So this is important, I think, on like a micro level. On a macro level, I think there has to be some kind of collaboration between the international community to coordinate a global strategy to combat the root causes of child labour, instead of leaving charities like ours to deal with the consequences of it. Whether that's the UN, G20, Davos, IMF, whoever, there needs to be a concerted effort from the top down so that the people working from the bottom up can have a better chance of succeeding. In terms of what we can do individually to create real change, I think we need to push multinational corporations to do more, to commit to corporate social responsibility programs that aren't just token gestures, but ones that actually create real change. We are official charity partners of Google, Accenture and Zoom. Google are good, they gift match for us every year, anything up to 7,000 they match. Accenture are good, they give us pro bono workshops. Zoom, it's very much, I hope no one on this call is a employee of Zoom, but what they do is they gift match €280 for any employee donates to us, but there's no way that they can actually find out about the different charities that Zoom have on their list unless they go to HR in the middle of their day and ask to donate. So it seems to me like a token gesture and one that's not really good enough. Their department that's in charge of that is called Zoom Cares. They're the people that you have to deal with. And the funny thing about Zoom Cares is no one who works for Zoom actually cares about the people who work for Zoom Cares. So because they're not the ones who make the money, obviously. So I feel like from a personal point of view, everyone needs to be holding big corporations who don't pay enough tax to account so that they can be putting that money into the future of the world and our children. And everyone can help in some way. You can volunteer. If you don't have the time to volunteer, you can donate. If you can't donate, you can spread the word. You can share details about causes that are worthwhile for free. But raising awareness of it is priceless. Where we work with sort of the children we work with, they're probably the last chain in the sequence of social inequality, but it's the first thing that we have to fix if we want to build a world that's fair for everyone, regardless of birthplace, gender, race, creed or background. And that's I think what this whole thing is working towards. So I'll leave it there, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. All three of you are doing amazing things in very different areas. And yet there were a few commonalities, I think, that came out from all of you there, which I really would love to go back into a little bit. First, I will say to any of the people attending today, if you do have any questions, to pop them in the Q&A box down the bottom. We'll be able to answer those questions for you. The panelists will be able to see them and respond. If it's a generic question, you can do that, or you can ask specific panelists. So one of the things that I think all three of you were kind of alluding to there was this idea of locally the work that you can do as an individual, and kind of how you can play a role in as a small mover in a big system. I think kind of, Nadeem, I think you were maybe the first one to bring that up when you were talking about kind of communities, communities approaching different challenges and how they can do that. So I don't know if you just want to talk a little bit more about your experience of kind of how communities have stepped up to kind of tackle these issues. Oh, you're just on mute there.
Hey, Joe, no problem. So actually, I feel very I don't know what the term is. What's the term? I feel like I'm in the wrong room with all these colleagues who are doing this amazing work on a almost global scale and dealing with extraordinary challenges in Bangladesh and in the Middle East. I guess the perspective I have, and this is really consequent really to the influence of my son, who's a student of anthropology, and the idea of localism and the work of David Graeber and others who've published work around this is really, I mean, you can spend your life regaling against governments and their failures of governments and corruption that is in fact damaging and losing the potential of the lives of millions and millions of people, sure. And the fact that, countries are poor as a consequence of lots of reasons, including history, I suppose. But I think you then feel like, well, how do you get, it feels when you look at it like that, it feels impossible. You just think, well, there's nothing I can do. I mean, what can I possibly do? And it's the world I live in. So I'm right now here based in East London, right? I went to a really good school. I went to a medical school. I had a good medical career. I went to Newcastle to study my MBA and took advantage of all the opportunities that the NHS afforded me in every sense. So it's not that I feel guilty of the opportunity. I look around and I say, why isn't the same opportunity or anything close to it available and open to others where I live? And in East London, where there is a huge amount of really quite glaring poverty. And I know people talk about relative poverty, so it isn't what people are suffering in Bangladesh in the camps. I accept that. But there is a real stress in society when people are poor and have been exposed to virtually no or very limited sense of the world and the future. And the only limitation is that in one sense. The world could show you a bit like Chris is showing children the potential of what's out there rather than what they've been exposed to. And I think you can say, well, you see that you can make that difference locally. So you don't have to think a global scale or a national scale or even county scale. You can say, well, what's around me? And today, all days, of course, in this era we're in, I can find schools, colleges, local communities that are trying to do something, and I can engage with them and say, look, I've got this experience. I've got these tools of how I think and how I act, and my network of people that I know might be able to help. And why wouldn't you use my experience of my network or my thinking to try and make a difference? And I think the key thing here is do it not because you are seeking a need or a recognition, just do it because you can, really. So, for example, here I do support coaching of 13-year-old deprived boys and girls that come from deprived communities, who've got limited perspectives on life. And you can see the change in their thinking over a series of months. And who knows whether that makes a difference or not, right? I have no idea if it makes a difference or not, but from the feedback that comes over time, you begin to think, well, okay, even if I can influence one who can then show themselves to be the role example of their own peers, then it makes a difference, because in this day and age, examples matter a huge amount. So the Marcus Rashford's role modeling as a footballer who's come from a deprived background and is trying to influence.
Yes to Marcus Rashford. Big yes.
Yeah. So, somebody like that is fundamentally, a good role model that allows others to be able to say, look, it's possible. I know it's tough, it's difficult, but it's possible. Not everybody can be a Premier League footballer, but the reality is that's not the aim. That can't be the aim. The aim is to just have a good life.
It was my aim.
Yeah, sorry. But, to lead a good life means not just about yourself, but about the people around you, right? And that's fundamentally, you can read philosophy as much as you like, but in the end, it's about how do you lead a good life? And then how do you influence those around you to have a good life? That's it. And I, for all my faults, don't believe there's anything after I'm dead and gone. So, I just need to do what I can here, because I'm not seeking a reward after, because there isn't anything after. So that's how I also view it, which is, I know, a personal view, but I'm not going to rely on the afterlife to solve people's problems. I don't think that, I mean, I think that's a missell and a historical way of containing what was impossible or controlling populations, right?
I'm seeing a lot of agreement coming from Chris there. Jessica, I was wondering, as someone who's worked globally, and probably come into big interactions with larger, like the UN, for example, or governments. I don't know if you have anything to add on that kind of locality of the work that you see globally.
I think, I think what Nadim was saying there has a lot of value, because I think that, there are big things that you can try and make happen, but ultimately, everything happens at the ground level, right? It's all about individuals in the local communities. So yes, you can sort of take yourself out and go into a certain community, but essentially you're still working and fostering relationships and trust and engagement and interaction, whatever it is in those communities. I think the other thing I would say is, ultimately, especially when disasters strike, it's the local people who are the first responders. So if it's an earthquake or if it's a fire going through a refugee camp, the people who are going to deal with it are the people who are there at that very moment. So anything that we're doing, as governments, as major organizations, it's still around capacity building those individuals who are there, and either to deal with the disaster, for example, or to give the psychosocial support afterwards, right? To help children, young adults, everybody just process what's happened to them, whether it's about having been sort of forced out of your country, or whether it is about dealing with the loss of your home and your family or whatever. So I think, again, that's all because you don't want to listen to somebody who's foreign to you and doesn't relate to you. You're going to trust, again, those people who are close to you, speak your language and know your situation, your history. So I think even though we need governments, we need big organizations, they need to do their part. Ultimately, everything is about mobilizing humans to interact with other humans. So therefore, I think it's quite right. Everybody can do something in their local community if they wish to, and should. And I think the other thing I would say is, if it is something that interests you, there are opportunities everywhere all the time. But also, if doing it on a grander scale or a more international scale, whatever you see it as, is also of interest, it's never too late. Particularly when I was doing the volunteering in Nepal, I was volunteering alongside a lot of 60, 65-year-old retiree teachers, doctors, nurses, people who had lived their entire lives, say, in the UK or elsewhere, built these huge careers, wealth of knowledge, and then now they'd passed different life phases. We're taking those skill sets out to build the capacity in communities in these sort of rural areas in impoverished countries. So there's always a time to do something, and I think to what Nadim said, if you can just influence and help one person, you've had a massive effect already. And the more you can do that, and then if you want to take it to bigger and grander things, then it's never too late. So I'll stop there.
I think that's brilliant. I'm going to start asking some of the questions from our panel, from our attendees now. But kind of one thing that I think now all three of you have kind of mentioned or brought up, and this kind of links into one of the questions we've had, is about kind of your former careers and how all three of you had careers before you started doing this kind of work. And one of our panelists is asking, or one of our attendees is asking you how your time at Newcastle perhaps equipped you for your paths in tackling social justice. And maybe we might just expand that to kind of how you found those former careers were really pivotal in kind of giving you the skills that you need. Chris, you mentioned kind of that problem solving, analytical kind of side of things. I don't know if you want to answer that question first.
Yeah, well, I guess having a plethora of different tutors and professors whilst I was at Newcastle showed me all the different styles of teaching and how every student requires a different tact and a different method to get the best out of them. So one thing that I do whenever I'm teaching the younger kids is I'll try and repeat the word I'm teaching them in English and Arabic and get it wrong and make myself sound stupid, so that then they aren't worried at all about making mistakes. One thing that I found interesting that Nadeem said is that I don't, three humans, I think, me, Nadeem, and Jessica aren't going to change the world, but the next generation of children can. And that's something that I think everybody has to be making an effort to do, because if all of us can change the lives of one or two people, then the next generation is going to sort of exponentially have a benefit from that. So I guess Newcastle instilled in me a love of learning that I now try and instill in other people.
I love that. Nadeem, do you have anything kind of that's come from your experience, whether it's through your early career or from Newcastle, that you felt has really helped you with the work that you're doing now?
I mean, I think, if I could kind of chunk it up into sort of three areas, I suppose. One is, arriving here as a refugee, you become very acutely aware of your place and trying to, cope with some real challenges. And, we were in a very difficult place as a family, and you were beholden to help, and you need help, and you recognize and remember that. And that made a huge difference. So if that was possible for us to get over the worst and the worst and the worst, then why would you then think, why can't I do this for others who are going to always be in similar situations, right? So that was quite sort of as an early, as a child, quite a deep experience that, of course, would never leave you. And also, how do you cope with the fact that people don't understand or are ignorant or are, challenging you based on misunderstanding? Then you have to cope, but then you have to figure out, how do I change that? And I was only able to really think about that once I was settled in my career and think, how do I change people's views of ethnic minorities or racism in organizations, right? So that's one chunk. Second chunk was, when you study medicine, if you're going to be any good as a doctor, you really, really need to understand social justice and the impact it has on people's health and opportunities, right? So in one sense, I know, well, at least in this country, that the people that mostly suffer the consequences of poor health as a result of poor education and poor work and life opportunities. That's really mostly it. Right, I know that there are other parts of the world that suffer as a consequence of transmissible diseases, etc. But here, if we had really good education and really good opportunities, then the health implications change significantly. And I know that because I worked in Germany, where the country is wealthier, yes, but much better educated, and quality of jobs are really high. And strategically, that makes a difference to the health and well-being of the population. And so apparently rich countries can also get it wrong, like we do. We have poor education systems generally, and job opportunities that are really about poor quality jobs rather than anything else. So as a medic, you begin to realize very quickly the family in front of you that has taken 3 buses and spent £8 to get there, and they can't afford it. And you made them come to see you, and I felt horribly guilty and saying, what have I done to this family for 15 minutes of my apparently valuable time? And they can't afford that £8.50 journey, and half a day or a whole day taken out. And I begin to then think, how should I be delivering medicine? How should I be caring for these people? How can I make it easier for them? And this is a rich country, apparently, right? Now then extrapolate that to countries that are, low income or low middle income, and what the challenges are there in terms of access, quality of care. And I guess the third bit, which was, I guess, my Newcastle OPA experience, was I was able to mix with a whole range of different professionals for a change, right? Because this world of medicine was very boring. It really is boring, because they all just talk about the same bloody thing. And I felt like, come on, guys. So when I went to the MBA world, there were people from the oil industry, the military, and I was like, wow, look at this, right? What an interesting world. But of course, their worlds were also equally interesting and challenging from where they came from. And you begin to realize that there's a massive commonality here across professions and their own lives and where they've come from, the communities they've come from. Just to go back to the point about, affecting, Chris's point, of course, is right. You affect children now and young people now, and the generations ahead will benefit. But I think I would also like to think about it the here and now, right? So if you can influence somebody now, they're likely to influence their colleagues or their peers or their friends or their family in the moment. So in one sense, to be boring, you can go back and read almost the first written text on management, which was Exodus, where Moses' father-in-law said, well, look, if you want to influence people, go and tell 10 people, those 10 people tell 10 people, each of them, about the message, and each of those will tell another 10 people, and then you've reached tens of thousands of people. And in one sense, how do you spread good engagement and good influence? And it's really about building a sort of feeling of momentum. And, I think there is some research that shows if you can really get a movement that is about 3% of a particular community, you can begin to show a difference in a community. Just 3%. You don't need 30% of a community to make a difference in a community. 3%. That's a pretty powerful number to remember, I think.
I really like that. You're absolutely right. That kind of knock-on effect and how quickly things like that can grow. Jessica, I'm going to come over to you now because someone has put a question in the chat just regarding how the COVID-19 vaccination in developed countries during this last year has kind of been happening and the progress of that. And do you feel like the donation systems from these developed nations have been working? And do you feel like kind of that is the way these kind of bigger nations, or maybe kind of, we were talking earlier about corporate social responsibilities, these bigger pharmaceutical companies can kind of give back? Or do you think there's more that could be done there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. I'm not sure I'm really an authority to speak on it, but I can just sort of say what I've seen from here. Well, so during the pandemic, I've been in the Philippines and then now in Bangladesh. And both are depending on contributions from other governments for vaccinations, and it's slow. It's very slow. There's a very low proportion of the population here in Bangladesh that are vaccinated. The government is running a vaccination program, but simply, they do not have their own supply. So exactly, it's about receiving. They receive a lot of support from India. But then India also had its own problems going on and needed to focus on supply for itself for a while. So I think these, you are very dependent on your neighbors and on your, on other nations to support. And I think, pandemics perhaps bring out the selfishness in all of us as individuals and as nations. But on the other hand, I think as well, it's also important to note that again, definitely not an expert on this, but the conditions for the pandemic and how it affects populations is very different between the different nations. Like everywhere started at a different point with different age of population, the climate, the environment, but also economies, capacity to take economic shocks. All of those are just huge factors that mean each country has really had its own learning curve for how to cope. And so I think some countries have done better than others. And I think everybody's trying to do their part. So we'll see. It's also difficult to track numbers, to have enough testing, to have enough. There's so much capacity that has to be built around how to deal with this kind of thing for all of those, all of these countries that need the support. So it's not just delivery of vaccines. It's training of medical staff, provision of testing facilities, procedures to handle quarantines and so on, but also the sheer fact that a lot of people live, close to or really well below any poverty line. So and day laborers, people who are living really hand to mouth. So the impact of closing an economy, of trying to lock down, is just devastating. So there's a huge balance for government to take between health and well-being and not wanting the pandemic itself to be a high cause of death, but at the same time managing the real danger to life that an economic breakdown can have as well. So I think it's very tough. I'm very pleased I'm not in those decision-making halls, those halls of power. And I think, we do need to look at ourselves. Each nation needs to look and see if we're doing enough to help those who need help. It's not just about, sort of doing the things that are sort of easy to do or look good for a PR. It's also, really helping when it's needed. So I hope we can continue to soul search and do more.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, I don't know if you'd have anything to add to that. I was kind of asking about that corporate responsibility, social responsibility, government's responsibilities. I know you mentioned that at the start, kind of that trade-off between earning your living, earning money, etc., in the society that we live in that's required, but then also kind of, you said, feeding your soul. So being able to give back and do all of that kind of work that actually makes a difference to people's lives. I don't know if you just have something you'd like to add.
Well, maybe something I'd like to add to what Jessica said earlier. I thought it was really interesting, but she said that there's no natural disasters, only disastrous responses to natural events. And I think that when you see an event that needs help urgently, then that's something that's worth doing. And there's not going to be as big a paycheck, but there will be a bigger smile, and that's worth it. But I think that CSR schemes are a good thing in general, but I don't think that they're being utilised as efficiently and as productively as they could be. I think that a lot of it is token gestures and doing things to look nice rather than to be nice. And I'm not quite sure how we hold them accountable, but I think it needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Just because I'm aware we only have around 10 minutes left, we have a few more questions in the chat. I'm going to go around each one of you and kind of ask you a two-pronged question that's come up. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, it's coming from one of our attendees who said, what would be one thing you would say to anyone that anyone could do in their day-to-day lives to take action for social justice and help those in need? So the first question is just going to be that, a piece of advice that you'd give to someone to help them make more of an action. And then the second part would be, what do you think, what would make you most proud as your legacy? Where do you want your kind of work to lead to? And I know we've answered this before. I think it's just an opportunity to really expand on that. Nadeem, I'm going to go to you first, if that's all right, just for those questions.
Sure. So listen, guys, I'm going to make a mess of it, so learn from what I'm going to say. So I think going to the first point, which is what's the one thing you would do to kind of make a difference? And I think, you could talk about money and skills and time that you could spend to try and make a difference. And the reality from a practical point of view is, think about what you might be able to offer yourself. Think about what your own journey and your own experiences. For sure, everybody has something that they can use, whether it's the experiences that they've built from their profession or just from life, and step back and say, okay, so how can I shape that to be useful to somebody else locally? And then you can look locally for what there is that people will for sure want to grab and draw you in, begin to influence something locally. And I think that it takes an effort, it takes time. And with our world of internet access to information, to communities and to institutions, it's not that hard now to find a place to be useful and thereby give your time. If you can't give money and if you can't train somebody through a particular skill, but you will, I suspect, at some point make that difference. So I think that's one thing you can immediately do. Right now, think about what you can do locally. In terms of, I think you said legacy. I'm not interested in legacy. I mean, really, seriously. I think the most I can hope is that as we said earlier, that you've influenced somebody to think differently, to then make a difference for themselves and the people around them. Right now, if they remember who did that, fine. But you'll never know. And actually, it doesn't bother me. I think it's just about everything that makes a difference to that individual, make the world a slightly better place, even if you think you can't measure it. And that's really it. I'm not, if you spend your life worrying about legacy, then you might want to become a billionaire first, really, I suppose, and then think about flying to space and blow all that wasteful money away. But that's no legacy I would want to be proud of, to be honest.
Thank you. Jessica?
Yeah, so I think maybe to sort of add on to and maybe sort of give an alternative to what Nadeem was saying, and actually go back to something he said earlier. I think one thing that everybody can do all the time is just sort of to reflect on yourself and how much of a role model you're being. So, make sure that you are not perpetuating any stereotypes or situations or negativity that is potentially having an effect on somebody else's whether it's social justice or just access opportunities, making sure that you are inclusive and encouraging. And it sounds it's very easy to say, and it's very maybe textbook, but actually if everybody was doing that, that would solve an awful lot of what goes on. Because sometimes it's just done by not thinking or being ignorant or, just being too busy and not considering. So I think, we can all consciously sort of remind ourselves and make sure that we are trying to be the best role model that we can all the time, even just with the person who's in the room with us or, the person that we're on Zoom with. So it's a little bit, maybe sounds a little bit like goody two shoes, but I think, otherwise, like the social injustice is there because of the acts of people. And so if everybody's just monitoring and trying to reduce their personal impact on that, then that would have a huge effect across society. In terms of legacy, I think one of the things that I've been super proud of, and that Newcastle sort of facilitated as well, was to be a female engineer for a start, to be able to be a role model to young girls in particular, and sort of go, look, you can study maths and physics and it can take you to these subjects, and it's completely possible. And yes, it can take, and who knew, but it's the same around the world. So look at that, it can take you to travel around the world as well. And now it's taken me to sort of, meet these amazing communities, and just, to try and have an impact on so many people's lives, even if it's a tiny little bit of tech. But if you manage to get it working and you manage to get it rolled out, and and it makes a difference in everybody's lives, then I come from that engineering and tech background, but I just every little thing helps, and so it doesn't really matter. I mean, what we've got English, we've got medicine, we've got engineering here. Like, they're very different subjects, but all of them you can take things from it and apply it to whatever context you want to, really. So I think in terms of kind of because legacy for me is sort of what would you want to be remembered for, which also sounds it's a bit premature for that, hopefully, but kind of I think just go. Like, yes, you can do it. Yes, you can be a minority that can make it, or you can be the agenda that's not usually in that area, or you can be not in your home country or whatever. You can still take steps and make things happen, and there again be the role model, and make sure that people are aware, even if it's only of your personal journey through sessions like today, because maybe somebody just goes, oh, actually, I was thinking of these things, and actually I could combine them. It's a little bit like that path that person's taken, and again, maybe you just spark something in one person, and that's already a great achievement for today.
I love that. And lastly but not least, Chris.
Well, I think there's so many worthy causes within social justice that the best way to make a real impact is to pick one, whether that's the one that you're most passionate about or the one that you're in a position to make the biggest impact in. Instead of spreading your efforts across 3 or 4 different causes, choose one, double down on it, and make sure that you make a tangible difference in that field. In terms of legacy, I just want to leave the world in a slightly better state than it was when I arrived in it. And that's it.
I like that. Short, sweet, but to the point. Big fan. Thank you so much to the three of you for joining me today. I hope you have had as much fun and have yourselves felt somewhat inspired by the other people that we've had on this call. I certainly think myself and everyone who's attending is incredibly grateful for your wisdom that you have shared with us today. So thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you, Nadeem. Thank you, Chris. And thank you everyone for coming. And we'll hopefully see you again soon at another event.